Welcome to Post-Burnout.com interviews. My name is Aaron Kavanagh and I'm the website's founder and editor-in-chief. Post-Burnout.com is a culture website dedicated to venerating burnt-out artists the world over. Our interviews are mainly recorded to be transcribed, but every now and again we release the audio in a series we call Post-Burnout.com interviews. If you enjoy what we do, be sure to subscribe. In this edition of Post-Burnout.com interviews, we speak with Lucy Katz, the drummer for the queer British punk band Dreamnails. Lucy talks about the band's new album, Doom Loop, working with Arctic Monkeys and Amyl and the Sniffers producer Ross Orton on the record, the importance of queer art today, how empathy has informed the songwriting on the record, and more.
Hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Hello. Good. How are you doing, Erin?
It's very nice to meet you. I'm doing well.
You as well. You as well. Thanks so much for inviting us to chat.
Absolutely. I know we're under a bit of a time restraint, so I won't take you too long.
Okay, thank you. No, it's just that I'm at work.
Yeah, no worries.
No, I'm
Yeah,
happy to chat.
I wanted to just ask about your new album, Doom Loop, that's coming out Friday. Yeah, I was wondering if maybe you could just explain the concept of a Doom Loop and kind of what the album is about.
Yes, sure. Okay, so a doom loop is actually a term that originated from it's to do with like economic cycles of economic hang on, wait, let me just like get my sorry, I just came from a meeting, so I just need to like get my brain in
Yeah,
order.
sorry.
um so it's a term from economics and I think from psychology, and a doom loop is essentially like a negative feedback loop. um so another way of thinking about it might be like a vicious cycle, like a crisis that keeps eating itself and feeding on itself. Um, and although, that term, we can understand that quite well in sort of the idea of politics and economics, we kind of are envisaging that we're like stuck in a doom loop, specifically to do with like toxic masculinity and like the repeated cycles of toxic masculinities that keep being lethal and extremely destructive, and detrimental to society and to all our lives. So sort of that's the concept behind a doom loop.
Yeah, and then when it kind of comes to the album, then
Mhm.
I haven't actually had the opportunity to hear the full album yet, but of the singles release, yeah, how do you feel like the concept kind of relates to the songs you're writing?
Sure. Okay. So I'll speak. I'm excited for you to hear the album
Yeah.
firstly, coming out hot off the press Friday. I'll be
Yeah.
interested to know what you think. Um, so I'll talk about each single that's been released and sort of how it fits into the concept. So the first song from the album, the first single, Good Guy, is also the first track on the album. And it's about, this concept of so often men are defended or their behavior is explained away by being like, oh, they're a good guy, they're just a good guy. So I think that's where we enter the album with quite like a classic didactic understanding of like toxic masculinity, and how like it can permeate through our social circles and also through society. And then moving on to the second song on the album, Femboy. So the last two singles, Femboy and Bullpit. So while the first half of the album kind of posits, you know, our struggles and oppression on like a more of a political, dimension, the second part of the album is more about how we might release ourselves from the doom loop. So how we might actually break free from that. And one way of doing that is sort of like leaning into and enjoying the things that we want and that we need, and sort of like hope and joy as something radical and political, sort of like political enjoyment, and like, yeah, fun being a radical act basically, and that being one way that we're going to like break through and actually, find our way out of these awful cycles.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, queer art at its heart is a very radical
Mhm.
movement. Whether you're talking about literature, music, film, any kind of artistic medium. Obviously, I mean, Dream Nails is a part of that. And what I was wondering is because, like, recently, and I don't claim to know like a lot about British politics. I don't live in the UK, but you know, we saw recently the Tory government kind of scapegoating trans people as a means of kind of like covering up their own kind of
Uh-huh.
inadequacies as a government, I guess. And you see that kind of like there's this kind of acceptable like in public discourse as kind of acceptable means of still attacking queer people in a way that like you think we were kind of potentially moved past, or that we're kind of getting past. And in fact, when I was thinking of queer art during the 2010s, kind of around the
Uh-huh.
same time Dream Nails would have been starting, I probably naively thought that queer art was kind of entering a more kind of mainstream acceptance in terms of it being a celebratory thing,
Uh-huh.
if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
but I think like it's very prescient that this album's coming out now, just like a week after all this like trans hysteria, has sort of
Exactly.
shown that
Yeah.
like hey, we still need to actually be fighting, we still need to be kind of conscious.
Oh, we still like not only do we still need to be fighting, but I mean, as you know, our lead singer is a trans person. And I think a big part of the trans experience that doesn't get spoken about enough, especially in like the constant news cycles and all the trans hate that's being spewed, certainly in the UK. I don't know what it's like over there, but from every angle, it seems like is that a big part of the album is Trans Joy. Femboy is a song about the possibility of expressing femininity as a boy. And it's absolute gender fuckery. And like I think with any oppressed or marginalized people, we expect their story to focus on sort of the negative aspects and the oppression. And while that is really important, I think what is often more exciting and more radical is to sort of focus on the celebration and on the joy. So it is a really pertinent time for the reasons that you've just said for the album to be released. And yeah, we hope that sort of the joy feeds through as well as the sort of frustration and anger.
As a band that's kind of touring around the UK, and that's very active in queer scenes, what's the kind of attitude now at the moment? Like, is it despondent, or are people kind of optimistic, or just generally, I guess, like from your experience?
You mean sort of like as a band operating within the queer scene
Yeah, so I mean,
right
like,
now?
generally speaking, because like I saw like the one kind of hopeful thing I saw from that was, and to be fair, my feed is probably biased because I'm probably following more left leaning accounts. But from what I saw, there was a huge rejection of the Tory, and it was very like transparent, and people calling out and saying like, we're not going to scapegoat trans people in this way.
Uh-huh.
Is there do you feel like there's a sense of I don't know, like what do you think the general attitude is at the moment?
It's really hard to tell. And I don't know. I think Ishmael will probably be the best person to speak to. From my perspective, it seems like, obviously we operate within like the art scene, which is always going to be more liberal, more open-minded.
Yeah.
But I think the reality comes down to the reality of life as a trans person, as a queer person, comes down to the fact that transphobic hate crimes have risen. I think it's 11% in the last, I don't know if it's the last 6 months or the last year. So,
Jesus. Yeah.
while it feels like from within the communities and from within the scene, people feel very well supported. Um, from within, I think from outside there is still so, it's just the culture wars, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
just, the culture wars, politicians especially spewing so much hate about trans people, and that filtering down to public opinion and the way that trans people like what they experience on the street and when they're going about their business. So I think, yeah, it's hard for me to comment directly as I live as a cis white woman,
Sure.
but I think, yeah, it's definitely not easy. And I mean, I have the same problem, my feed and even the band's feed, we're kind of surrounded by, very left leaning, left wing people. So it is hard to gauge all the time.
On one hand, I have kind of mixed feelings on how kind of social media is kind of bringing these discussions about. I mean, the one hand, it is giving a voice to the marginalized who otherwise wouldn't have had it. And
Hmm.
simultaneously, it's also giving us Andrew Tate. You know what I mean? So it's like I wonder what the kind of balance is there in between, like regulation, or I don't know what the means of kind of combating that is in a way that wouldn't screw over the marginalized while trying to combat the hatred that's being kind of spewed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, like, also our role as artists and musicians, like art and music are never going to solve anything on their own. Like, the hard political work comes from like thankless, tireless grassroots and, frontline organizing. I think that what we're trying to do is just raise awareness and especially at our shows, kind of create spaces where people can experience catharsis and can feel genuinely safe. And and liberated. But yeah, I don't have the answer for that either.
That's fine. I guess one last thing I'll ask is the album's actually produced by Ross Orton. I was
Yes.
wondering how he got involved and kind of what you thought he brought to the product.
Oh, well, Ross is a great producer. So, I mean, the thing that drew us to him was obviously his back catalogue. So, I mean, he's worked on Arctic Monkeys, which is like everyone's favorite Arctic Monkeys album. He worked with Amyl and the Sniffers, that are a huge like punk reference point for us of, of more contemporary times. Um, we just liked his sound, his sort of special sauce that he is able to sprinkle. He has a great ear. Um, and we just, we wanted this album to be a bit more, not necessarily polished, but we wanted to sort of like retain the like live energy and the punk spirit, but also give it maybe something a bit more radio friendly and a bit more accessible to people that hadn't listened to us before. And Ross was kind of the perfect fit for that. And no, he's done an amazing job with the album, so we're very happy about that.
You're doing a very extensive tour of the UK and Europe coming up,
Yes.
starting actually on Friday itself.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering what people can kind of expect of that tour and what you're kind of bringing to the shows.
Oh, okay. So on Friday, we're starting the in-store tour, which is something we've never done before. So we've got 6 in-store dates all around England. And in those shows, we're going to be playing the album start to finish, more stripped down, with sort of like chat and conversation in between about each track in turn, about the concept of the album as a whole. Um, and yeah, it's really nice breaking down the process. And I think, anyone who really loves music um is really interested by the process of like how you actually write, how you actually record. Like I was interested about those stuff before I was in a band. And I'm really interested with like how films are made and how TV's made and how books are written and that kind of stuff. So I think that that's what people can expect from that, is sort of the album as the whole, like witnessing or hearing the whole arc and also having more of an understanding of the process. And then when we move on to the live dates, the headline shows, I mean, that's just going to be like pure punk chaos. We've got, we've just got lots of like audience participation. We've just put together like a really slick live set. It's primarily the new tracks. We've got a couple of old ones thrown in for good measure. Um, just a little sprinkling of Limp Bizkit as well, just to like, set the tone for the whole piece. That's an exclusive. Um, so it's just sort of like what people can always have expected at our shows, which is queer punk, rage, and fire, but just like a little bit more world class stadium ready.
Okay. Um,
So yeah.
the very last thing I'll ask you before I let you go is, the band's obviously been around for almost a decade now at this point. In that time, do you think, I don't know, how do you feel like, um, the band has kind of adapted to the times as they change? Because obviously, I mean, we're talking 2015. I think that's like just prior to the election of Trump, and kind of
Yeah.
we see the kind of how fervent the kind of right wing, kind of seemingly globally, have become in the kind of acceptable level of like attacking
Hmm.
kind of marginalized groups. Are getting very confident in a way that, like, I think, like, even a decade ago, like they would be a lot more um I don't know, they had those views, but they were a lot more kind of, what do you call it, kind of I don't know, selective in their wording. Where now they just seem to be saying the loud part, the quiet part out loud. Yeah, I was wondering how you feel the band has adapted to those 10 years. And
Yeah. Wow, that is a really good question. Um, okay, so I think that, when we all think back to 2015, just feels like a simpler time, really.
yeah,
Feels like we were all much more naive. Obviously there was massive things happening and about to happen, but I think, we are a political band and we exist first and foremost to respond to what's happening politically. And it feels like we have become more like that has become even more entrenched in us. Um, because there's so much more, you know on one hand it seems like things might be getting better for marginalized peoples, but the experience on the ground is just so extremely different.
yeah,
Also being caught in the crossfires of like culture wars, that what we said about earlier, like issues, groups being scapegoated. Trans people are a perfect example of that. all issues are suddenly so much more complex and so much more, difficult to talk about. And I think some people might think that punk is quite black and white and maybe isn't nuanced enough to sort of incorporate, the complexity of some of these arguments. But I think actually, hopefully, what we've tried to do is show that the only way forward is sort of empathy. And actually, I think what we're trying to do now, compared to, I mean, we're all older as well for a start, than compared to what we were doing at the beginning when we were much more fueled by like blind anger and rage. And I think it's probably a part of things becoming so complex and confusing culturally and politically, and also the fact that we've grown older. On this album, we see ourselves much more of like curious observers and commentators. And I think the impetus behind the writing comes from an attempt that we genuinely want to understand. We have a song on the album that's going to be a focus track released alongside the album on Friday. And it's basically a rap written from the perspective of an incel. And, it's not mocking, it's not belittling, it's genuinely trying to understand, why is someone radicalized like this? Why are young men, being radicalized and are having and like cultivating these views and this misogyny and this hate? So I think that, our response is, yeah, just trying to like genuinely understand rather than like anarchically being like, fuck this shit, everything's fucked, because like we all know that to be true. But that doesn't seem to be serving us or anyone. So it feels like the only way that we're actually going to progress now as a band, as artists, and indeed as a society, is to try and understand, try and discuss, and just try and figure out what the hell's going on and see if we can like tap into our common humanity at some point and see where that takes us for once.
That's perfect. I'd love to talk with you again sometime. We have more time.
Yeah,
It's
no,
a really enjoyable
absolutely.
discussion.
And so you're based, where in Ireland are you based?
Dublin.
In Dublin. Oh, we have played in Dublin once years ago, but hopefully we'll get over to Ireland in the next year or so.
Perfect.
And yeah, it would be great to see you at a show. So yeah, stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for your time, and
That's
best
my
of luck with the
pleasure.
record. Thank you for listening to
Okay,
that
thank you
episode
so
of
much. I hope you enjoy it.
postburnout.com
Thank
interviews.
you.
We hope you enjoyed and stay tuned
Bye.
for more.